Standing at the altar, in my perfectly pressed tuxedo, I watched 300 guests shift uncomfortably in their seats at Willowbrook Gardens. The spring breeze carried the scent of blooming lilacs, but all I could smell was my own nervous sweat. Pastor Williams kept glancing at his watch, clearing his throat every few minutes. My best man Ryan squeezed my shoulder and whispered for the fourth time, "She'll be here, Jake. Emma's probably just fixing her makeup." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But I knew better. Deep in my gut, I knew Emma wasn't coming through those garden gates, because 20 minutes before the ceremony was supposed to start, I'd received a single text message that changed everything. "I need to know if you really love me. Don't look for me. If our love is real, you'll understand." What Emma didn't know was that her sister Sophie had been standing right behind me when that message came through. What Emma couldn't have predicted was that Sophie would look me dead in the eyes and say, "Well, Jake, looks like my sister wants to play games. How about we give her something worth watching?" That's when I realized this wedding day was about to become something none of us expected. By the end of it, I'd discover which sister truly understood what love meant. 3 months earlier, everything seemed flawless. Emma and I had been together for 2.5 years, and our relationship looked like something straight out of a romantic movie. She was the marketing director at a prestigious firm in downtown Riverside, while I ran my own small but successful digital agency on Maple Street. We'd met at a networking event at the Blue Moon Cafe, where she'd approached me with a confidence that took my breath away. "You must be Jake Morrison," she'd said, extending her perfectly manicured hand. "I've heard impressive things about your work with local businesses." That night, we talked until the cafe staff started stacking chairs around us. Emma had this way of making everything feel significant, like our conversation was the most important thing happening in the world. When she laughed at my terrible jokes about marketing strategies, I knew I was falling hard. Our courtship unfolded like clockwork. Dinner dates every Friday at upscale restaurants where Emma knew the staff by name. Weekend trips to her family's lake house in Pine Valley, where her parents David and Linda welcomed me with the kind of warmth that made me feel like I'd found my forever family. Emma had this incredible ability to plan every detail of our lives together, from our matching workout schedules to the exact timeline for when we'd get engaged. "I believe in intentional love," she told me one evening as we walked along Sunset Beach. "When you know what you want, you create a plan to achieve it. Random romance is for people who don't understand commitment." I found her certainty refreshing. After growing up in a household where my parents' relationship was chaotic and unpredictable, Emma's structured approach to love felt like safety. She had spreadsheets for our budget, color-coded calendars for our social obligations, and a 5-year plan that included marriage, a house in Oak Ridge Drive, and 2 children spaced exactly 3 years apart. The proposal happened exactly when Emma had hinted it should. 6 months ago, at the same spot where we'd first walked on Sunset Beach, I got down on one knee with the exact ring she'd shown me 3 times in different jewelry store windows. Her tears seemed genuine, her excitement infectious. She immediately pulled out her phone to call her sister Sophie, and I watched her face light up as she shared our news. "Sophie's going to be my maid of honor, of course," Emma said, slipping her arm through mine as we walked back to the car. "She's the only person who really understands what this means to me." Sophie was 2 years younger than Emma, but the sisters couldn't have been more different. Where Emma was polished and planned, Sophie was spontaneous and genuine. Emma wore designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. Sophie showed up to family dinners in paint-stained jeans and messy buns. Emma worked in corporate marketing. Sophie taught art classes to kids at the community center and painted murals around Riverside in her spare time. But what struck me most about Sophie was how she looked at people. When Emma introduced us properly at her engagement party, Sophie studied my face with an intensity that made me slightly uncomfortable.
Ow.
Not in a romantic way, but like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "So you're the one who finally convinced my sister to slow down long enough to fall in love," Sophie said, raising her wine glass in a mock toast. "That's quite an accomplishment." There was something in her tone I couldn't quite place. Not hostility exactly, but a kind of knowing skepticism that made me wonder what Emma had told her about our relationship. The wedding planning consumed the next 6 months of our lives. Emma approached it with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. Guest lists were categorized by relationship type and importance level. Vendor meetings were scheduled weeks in advance with detailed agendas. Even our wedding party had been selected based on what Emma called optimal visual composition and emotional significance. I threw myself into the preparations because Emma's happiness seemed to depend on every detail being perfect. We toured 17 venues before she settled on Willowbrook Gardens. We tasted food from 12 different caterers before selecting one whose salmon met her exact specifications. The flowers alone required 8 separate consultations with 3 different florists. "This is our one chance to show the world who we are as a couple," Emma explained, when I suggested we might be overthinking the centerpiece arrangements. "Every choice we make tells a story about our values and our future together." Sophie, meanwhile, seemed to float through the wedding preparations like an amused observer. She showed up to dress fittings with paint under her fingernails and made the other bridesmaids laugh with impressions of the overly dramatic wedding planner. Grace, during the rehearsal dinner planning, she suggested we skip the formal speeches and just have people share spontaneous memories instead. "Absolutely not," Emma said firmly. "Spontaneous speeches lead to inappropriate stories and awkward silences. Everyone will have exactly 3 minutes, and I've already given them suggested topics." Sophie caught my eye across the table and gave me a look that said, "See what I mean?" But she didn't argue. She never argued with Emma directly. Instead, she'd make these small observations that somehow highlighted the absurdity of whatever elaborate plan Emma had constructed. The week before the wedding, Emma's stress reached what I thought was its peak. She called me at 7 in the morning to discuss the weather forecast, texted me hourly updates about RSVPs, and made 3 separate trips to Willowbrook Gardens. To ensure the staff understood her vision for the ceremony setup, "Everything has to be perfect, Jake," she said, as we lay in bed the night before our bachelor and bachelorette parties. "I've spent 2 years planning this day. It's going to be exactly what we dreamed of." But as I held her in the darkness, I realized I couldn't remember us dreaming about any of this together. Emma had dreamed about it, planned it, and executed it with military precision. I had simply agreed, supported, and shown up where she told me to be. The thought disturbed me more than I wanted to admit. When had I stopped having opinions about my own wedding? When had I started feeling like a well-dressed prop in Emma's carefully choreographed production? I pushed the doubts away, telling myself that cold feet were normal. Emma loved me, I loved her, and in less than 24 hours we'd be married. Everything else was just pre-wedding nerves. I had no idea that Emma was having doubts of her own different doubts, but doubts that would lead her to make a decision that would change everything for all of us. The morning of our wedding, I woke up in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, where Ryan and I had spent the night as part of Emma's proper wedding traditions requirement. The sun was shining, the weather was perfect, and I felt strangely calm for the first time in months. Maybe that should have been my first warning sign. The morning of the wedding started exactly as Emma had planned. At 8 a.m. sharp, the bridal party gathered at the Oak Ridge Drive family home for what Emma had scheduled as preparation and bonding time. The house buzzed with controlled chaos as hairstylists, makeup artists, and photographers moved through the rooms like a well-rehearsed dance troupe. I arrived at 10:30 for the pre-ceremony photos. Wearing the charcoal gray suit Emma had selected after visiting 4 different tailors, the moment I walked into the Willowbrook Gardens venue, Grace, the wedding planner, descended on me with her clipboard and headset, rattling off the timeline with military precision. Groomsmen photos at 11:15, family photos at noon first, look session at 12:30, and ceremony begins promptly at 2, she recited, checking items off her list. "Your bride has everything running exactly on schedule." Ryan appeared at my side, adjusting his tie and grinning. "Ready to become a married man, my friend?" Nodded, though something felt off in a way I couldn't articulate. The venue looked stunning, exactly as Emma had envisioned. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. White roses and baby's breath adorned every surface. String lights twinkled between the oak trees, and the lake beyond provided the perfect backdrop for our ceremony. 300 guests would soon fill the white wooden chairs arranged in perfect rows, creating the fairy tale wedding Emma had planned down to the smallest detail. The morning photos went smoothly. My groomsmen and I posed by the lake, on the wooden bridge, and in front of the old stone gazebo where Emma and I would exchange vows. Marcus, my business partner, kept everyone laughing with stories about our early entrepreneurial disasters, while Tom, my college roommate, documented everything on his phone for social media. At 12:15, Grace's voice crackled through. Her headset, ride is running 15 minutes behind schedule. Makeup artist needed extra time for the final touches. I shrugged, figuring delays were normal for weddings. Emma's perfectionist tendencies probably meant she was having the makeup artist redo her lipstick for the third time, or adjusting her veil until it hung at precisely the right angle. At 12:45, Grace looked genuinely concerned. Still, no word from the bridal suite. I'm going to check on them. She returned 10 minutes later with Sophie trailing behind her. Sophie's bridesmaid dress was perfect, her hair elegantly styled, but her expression was unreadable in a way that made my stomach tighten. Jake, can I talk to you privately? Sophie asked, glancing around at the gathered groomsmen. We walked toward the edge of the lake, away from the photographers and wedding party. Sophie stopped near a cluster of weeping willows, their branches creating a natural curtain around us. Emma left, she said without preamble. The words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean left? Sophie pulled out her phone and showed me a text message. She sent this to the whole bridal party about 20 minutes ago. The message read, I can't go through with this. I need time to think. Tell Jake I'm sorry. Don't try to find me. I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over as if they might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. This has to be some kind of mistake. Where did she go? Nobody knows, Sophie replied, sliding her phone back into her small clutch purse. She was in the bridal suite getting her final dress adjustments. And when the photographer went to get her for the first look photos, she was gone. Her dress is still hanging there. Her makeup bag is still open, but she vanished. The logical part of my mind immediately started problem solving. Did she take her car? Her purse? Her car is still in the driveway. Her purse is still in the bridal suite, but her regular clothes are missing from the overnight bag she brought, and her phone goes straight to voicemail. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Sophie, this doesn't make sense. Everything was fine last night. We talked about our honeymoon plans, about how excited we were. She's been planning this wedding for 2 years, Sophie studied. My face with that same intense expression I'd noticed at our engagement party. Jake, can I ask you something? And will you give me an honest answer? Of course. When was the last time you and Emma had a real conversation about something that wasn't wedding related? The question caught me off guard. Started to answer immediately, then stopped as I realized I couldn't remember. Over the past 6 months, every interaction Emma and I had shared revolved around vendor meetings, guest lists, timeline confirmations, or wedding logistics. Even our supposed relaxation time had been spent addressing wedding-related stress or planning post-wedding activities. I don't understand what you're getting at, I said, though an uncomfortable truth was beginning to form in my mind. Sophie sat down on a nearby bench, smoothing her bridesmaid dress carefully. Emma called me at 3 a.m. last week. She was crying, which you should know almost never happens. She told me she felt like she was marrying a stranger. The words hit harder than I expected. A stranger? Sophie, we've been together for over 2 years. Have you, though? Sophie's voice was gentle, but direct. Or have you been together with the version of yourselves that exists in Emma's perfectly planned world? I wanted to argue, to defend our relationship, but memories started flooding back with uncomfortable clarity. Emma directing our conversations toward topics she'd researched in advance? Yes. Emma selecting restaurants where she knew the menu would offer options that fit our shared dietary goals? Emma scheduling our social activities with friends she'd determined? Were positive influences on our relationship. She loves me, I said, but the words sounded hollow, even to my own ears. I'm sure she does, Sophie replied. But Jake, do you know what her biggest fear is? What she dreams about at night? What she wanted to be when she was 7 years old? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I had no idea. Sophie continued, she's terrified of thunderstorms. Because when she was 6, our house got struck by lightning during a storm, and she thought we were all going to die. She dreams about traveling to Morocco because she read a book about Marrakesh when she was in high school and became obsessed with the markets and the architecture. When she was 7, she wanted to be a veterinarian until our neighbor's cat died and she cried for 3 weeks straight. Each piece of information felt like a revelation about someone I thought I knew completely. Why didn't she tell me these things? Because Emma believes that love should be rational and planned and controllable, Sophie said. She thinks that sharing messy, irrational, vulnerable parts of yourself is a sign of weakness. She's been trying to be the perfect girlfriend for you, just like she tries to be perfect at everything else. The wedding guests were starting to arrive, their cars filling the parking lot as Grace directed them toward the ceremony area. I could see confusion beginning to ripple through the crowd as the start time approached with no bride in sight. So what happens now? I asked, gesturing toward the 300 people who had traveled from across the country to witness a wedding that apparently wasn't going to happen. Sophie stood up and smoothed her dress again. Well, you have a few options. You can send everyone home and spend the next few weeks trying to track down my sister and convince her to come back. You can pretend this is all a temporary panic attack and reschedule everything for next month. She paused, looking directly into my eyes with an expression I couldn't quite read. Or, she continued, you can recognize that maybe Emma did you both a favor by forcing you to confront what your relationship actually is versus what you've been pretending it is. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart leaped, thinking Emma had changed her mind. But the message was from an unknown number. I need to know if you really love me. Don't look for me. If our love is real, you'll understand. I showed the message to Sophie, who read it twice before shaking her head. That's Emma, all right? Even her dramatic exit has to be a test with specific parameters and success criteria. What kind of test? I asked, though I was beginning to understand that nothing about this situation was going to be simple or straightforward. Sophie looked toward the ceremony area, where guests were taking their seats and Pastor Williams was checking his notes one final time. I think she wants to see if you'll fight for her. If you'll prove that your love is strong enough to overcome uncertainty and imperfection. And what do you think I should do? Sophie smiled for the first time since she delivered the news about Emma's disappearance. I think you should. Ask yourself whether you're fighting for Emma or fighting for the idea of the life she planned for both of you. The distinction hit me like a lightning bolt. As I stood there in my perfectly fitted suit, surrounded by the perfectly decorated venue where our perfectly planned wedding was supposed to take place, I realized I didn't know the difference anymore. That's when Sophie said the words that would change everything. Jake, I have a proposal for you. What if we gave Emma the reaction she's not expecting? Sophie's proposal caught me completely off guard. Standing there by the lake with 300 wedding guests taking their seats and my bride nowhere to be found. The last thing I expected was for Emma's sister to suggest we give Emma the reaction she's not expecting. Yes. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, watching Grace frantically gesture toward Pastor Williams while checking her watch for the 10th time in 5 minutes. Sophie glanced toward the ceremony area, then back at me with a mischievous expression that reminded me why Emma always said her sister was unpredictable. Emma wants to test whether you'll fight for her, right? She wants to see if you'll chase after her and prove your love meets her standards. I nodded slowly, still not understanding where this was heading. But what if instead of playing her game by her rules, we showed her something she never considered, Sophie continued. What if we demonstrated that real love doesn't perform on command or jump through hoops to prove itself? The idea was intriguing, but terrifying. Sophie, I'm not sure I follow your logic. She sat back down on the bench and patted the space beside her. Sit down for a minute. Let me tell you something about my sister that might help you understand what's really happening here. I sat, loosening my tie as the afternoon sun beat down on my formal attire. In the distance, I could See Ryan fielding questions from confused relatives who were wondering why the ceremony hadn't started yet? When Emma was 16, she dated this guy named Alex Chen, Sophie began. He was the captain of the debate team, student council president, perfect SAT scores, the whole package. Emma was completely infatuated with him. I found myself leaning forward, hungry for insights into Emma's past that she'd never shared with me. One day, Alex didn't call her when he said he would. Instead of just asking him about it, Emma decided to test whether he really cared about her. She started ignoring his calls, canceling their plans, and being mysteriously unavailable. She wanted to see if he'd fight for her attention. What happened? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Alex got confused, then frustrated, then hurt. Eventually, he started dating someone else because he thought Emma had lost interest. When Emma found out, she was devastated. She convinced herself that Alex had never really loved her because he didn't fight hard enough to win her back. The parallel to our current situation was becoming uncomfortably clear. So you think Emma is testing me the same way she tested? Alex. Sophie nodded. Emma has this deep fear that people only love the perfect version of her. She's terrified that if she shows any vulnerability or missinzes, people will realize she's not worth fighting for. So she creates these elaborate scenarios to test whether love can survive imperfection.
Yeah?
I thought about all the times Emma had seemed to create small crises or challenges in our relationship. Moments where she'd withdraw or become distant until I reassured her or made some grand gesture to prove my commitment. I'd always interpreted these episodes as normal relationship insecurities. But now I was seeing a pattern I'd never recognized. The problem is, Sophie continued, Emma's tests are designed to confirm her worst fears, not to build genuine intimacy. She sets up impossible standards and then feels abandoned when people can't meet them. Grace appeared at the edge of the trees, her professional composure finally cracking. Jake, I need to know what we're doing here. The guests are getting restless. Pastor Williams has another ceremony at 4, and the caterers need to know about dinner service. I looked at Sophie, who gave me an encouraging nod. Give us 5 more minutes, Grace. We're figuring something out. Grace hurried back toward the crowd, her headset crackling with increasingly frantic communications from her team. So what's your proposal? I asked Sophie, directly. She stood up and smoothed her bridesmaid dress one more time. Emma wants to see if you'll chase her and beg her to come back. She's probably expecting you to spend the next few weeks calling her friends, driving to all her favorite places, and making increasingly desperate declarations of love until she feels sufficiently convinced of your devotion. The accuracy of this prediction was unsettling. My first instinct had indeed been to get in my car and start searching every coffee shop, bookstore, and quiet spot in Riverside until I found Emma and convinced her to return. But what if instead, Sophie continued, we showed her that real love doesn't play games? What if we demonstrated that healthy relationships are built on honest communication, not elaborate tests? I was beginning to understand her suggestion, but the implications were staggering. Sophie, are you suggesting we go through with some version of this ceremony without Emma? She shook her head quickly. Not exactly. I'm suggesting we use this moment to show Emma what authentic connection actually looks like. Before I could ask for clarification, Sophie pulled out her phone and started typing rapidly. I'm sending Emma a message that she's definitely not expecting. She showed me the screen as she typed, Emma, Jake and I are about to make an announcement to your wedding guests. We're going to tell them the truth about what happened today and what it means. If you want to hear what we have to say, you know where to find us. Love, Sophie. My stomach dropped. Sophie, what are you planning to announce? She hit send and slipped her phone back into her clutch. That's up to you. Okay. But I think it's time everyone in Emma's life stopped enabling her need to control and test everything. Someone needs to show her what it looks like when people choose honesty over performance. The weight of the moment hit me fully. 300 people had traveled to witness Emma and me exchange vows, but instead, they were about to witness something entirely different. The wedding Emma had planned for 2 years was about to become something she'd never anticipated. What? If this backfires completely? I asked. What if Emma never forgives either of us? Sophie's expression grew serious. Jake, do you want to marry someone who needs you to prove your love through elaborate tests? Do you want to spend your life walking on eggshells, always wondering what challenge or crisis she'll create next to validate that you care enough? The questions cut straight to the heart of doubts I'd been suppressing for months. Emma's need for constant reassurance and validation had become exhausting in ways I'd never acknowledged. Every conversation felt like a performance where I had to hit the right emotional notes to keep her satisfied. "And what about you?" asked Sophie. "What do you get out of this plan?" She looked toward the ceremony area where guests were beginning to murmur more loudly among themselves. "I get to stop watching my sister sabotage every relationship in her life because she's too scared to be vulnerable. I get to stop pretending that Emma's behavior is normal or healthy." The honesty in Sophie's voice was refreshing after months of tiptoeing around Emma's sensitivities. When was the last time someone in Emma's circle had spoken this directly about her patterns? "There's something else you should know," Sophie added quietly. "Emma's been having doubts about marrying you for weeks. She's been calling me in the middle of the night, crying about whether she's making a mistake. But instead of talking to you about her concerns, she convinced herself that disappearing on your wedding day would somehow give her the clarity she needed. This revelation hit harder than Emma's actual disappearance. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because Emma made me promise not to interfere. She said she needed to figure things out on her own. But watching you stand at that altar waiting for someone who was never planning to show up, I realized that sometimes interfering is the most loving thing you can do." Pastor Williams approached our secluded spot by the lake, his expression a mixture of concern and professional urgency. "Jake, I hate to interrupt, but we really need to address the situation with your guests. People are starting to leave, and I have another ceremony scheduled." I looked at Sophie, who nodded encouragingly. "It's time to choose, Jake. You can spend the next month playing Emma's game and hoping she eventually decides you've proven yourself worthy, or you can show her what it looks like when someone chooses authentic communication over manipulation." Taking a deep breath, I straightened my tie and walked toward the ceremony area with Sophie beside me. The crowd of 300 guests fell silent as we approached the altar where I was supposed to be exchanging vows with Emma. Instead, I was about to do something that would change all of our lives in ways none of us could predict. Brian met me at the front of the crowd, his expression questioning. I nodded toward him and Pastor Williams, then turned to face the assembled wedding guests. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, my voice carrying across the silent gathering. "I need to share something with you that wasn't part of the original plan." The silence that followed my opening words was deafening. Faces stared back at me, a mixture of confusion, concern, and curiosity etched across their features. I could see Emma's parents, David and Linda, in the front row, their expressions shifting from anticipation to alarm. My own parents sat rigid in their seats, my mother's hand clutched tightly in my father's. Sophie stood beside me, her presence both comforting and terrifying. This moment would either be the most honest thing I'd ever done or the biggest mistake of my life. "Emma is not here today," I continued, watching as murmurs rippled through the crowd. "She made a choice this morning to leave, and she asked me not to look for her." David started to rise from his seat, but Linda placed a firm hand on his arm. Keeping him seated, I could see the pain and confusion in their eyes, the questions they wanted to ask but couldn't in front of this crowd. "For the past 6 months, I've been preparing for what I thought would be the perfect wedding," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. Emma planned every detail with incredible precision, and I supported every decision because I believed that making her happy was the same thing as building a strong foundation for our marriage. I paused, looking out at the faces of friends and family who had traveled from across the country to witness what they thought would be a celebration of love. Instead, they were about to hear a confession that would challenge everything they believed about Emma and me as a couple. But standing here today, I realized that somewhere along the way, we stopped building a relationship and started performing one. We became so focused on creating the appearance of perfect love that we forgot to actually connect with each other as real, flawed, complicated human beings. Sophie stepped forward slightly, offering silent support as I continued with the most difficult speech of my life. Emma's decision to leave wasn't really about cold feet or wedding day nerves, I said. It was about fear. Fear that if she let me see the parts of herself that aren't perfectly polished, I might stop loving her. Fear that our relationship couldn't survive the kind of vulnerability that real intimacy requires. I could see people shifting in their seats, some nodding in recognition while others looked deeply uncomfortable with the level of honesty I was sharing. This wasn't the kind of revelation anyone expected to hear at a wedding ceremony. I'm being completely honest, I continued. I've been just as afraid to challenge Emma when her need for control became overwhelming. Afraid to share my own doubts and concerns because I didn't want to disrupt the perfect life she'd planned for us. Afraid to admit that I don't actually know some of the most basic things about the woman I was supposed to marry today.
Marcus!
My business partner was recording everything on his phone, probably sensing that this moment would be significant regardless of how it played out. Tom leaned forward in his seat, his expression a mixture of pride and concern for what I was putting myself through. Emma left me a message asking me to prove that our love is real, I said, pulling out my phone and reading her text aloud. She wants me to chase her, to fight for her, to demonstrate through grand gestures and desperate pleas that she's worth pursuing. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked directly at the section where Emma's college friends were. Sitting there, faces a mixture of shock and recognition. But I'm not going to do that, I announced, feeling Sophie's encouraging presence beside me. Not because I don't love Emma, but because I love her too much to keep enabling a pattern. That's hurting both of us. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Even Grace had stopped frantically checking her clipboard and was listening with rapt attention. Real love doesn't require constant testing, I continued. Real love doesn't demand that people prove their devotion through elaborate challenges or by tolerating behavior that makes them feel small and uncertain. Real love creates space for both people to be authentic, even when that authenticity is messy or imperfect. I turned slightly to acknowledge Sophie, who had been watching me with an expression of quiet pride. Sophie helped me understand something important today. She helped me see that by always accommodating Emma's need to control our relationship, I wasn't actually loving her well. It was enabling her fear of intimacy and her belief that she has to be perfect to be lovable. Sophie stepped forward, her voice clear and strong as she addressed the crowd. My sister is brilliant and accomplished and worthy of genuine love. But she's also terrified of being vulnerable, and that fear has been driving her to sabotage every meaningful relationship in her life. I watched as understanding dawned on several faces in the crowd. Emma's pattern of creating drama and testing people wasn't a secret to those who knew her well. No one had ever addressed it this directly in such a public forum. Emma is somewhere in Riverside right now, probably waiting for Jake to start. Calling her friends and searching for her, Sophie continued. She's expecting him to spend the next few weeks proving that he loves her enough to chase her despite her behavior. Sophie looked directly at her parents as she spoke her next words. But we're not going to do that anymore. Jake isn't going to chase her, and I'm not going to cover for her. We're going to show her what it looks like when people choose honest communication over manipulation. David finally stood up, his face flushed with anger and confusion. Sophie, what are you doing? This is your sister we're talking about. She's obviously having some kind of breakdown, and instead of helping her, you're humiliating her in front of everyone she knows. The confrontation I'd been dreading was finally happening. David's protective instincts toward Emma were admirable, but they were also part of the problem. Emma's family had been shielding her from the consequences of her behavior for years. Dad, I'm helping her the only way I know how, Sophie replied, her voice steady, despite the emotional weight of the moment. By refusing to pretend that her behavior is normal or acceptable. By showing her that people who love her are capable of setting boundaries. Linda dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, torn between supporting her daughters and processing the reality of what was being revealed about Emma's approach to relationships. Jake, David said, turning his attention to me, Emma loves you. Whatever doubts she's having, whatever fears are driving this behavior, you can work through them together. That's what marriage is about. I appreciated David's faith in the power of love to overcome obstacles, but I also recognized the enabling pattern that Sophie had described. David, I do want to work through these issues with Emma, I said. But I want to work through them honestly, as equals who are committed to understanding each other better. I don't want to work through them by chasing her around town and begging her to come back every time she decides to test my devotion. I addressed the crowd again, knowing that my next words would be the most important ones I'd spoken all day. Here's what Sophie and I are proposing. We're going to treat Emma like the intelligent, capable adult she is. We're going to trust that she heard every word we just said, because I'm confident she's watching or listening somehow. We're going to give her the space to decide whether she wants to participate in a real relationship or continue playing games that hurt everyone involved. I paused, making eye contact with as many people as possible. If Emma wants to talk, she knows where to find me. I'll be here for the rest of the afternoon, and then I'll be at my apartment on Maple Street. I'm not going to search for her or pressure her or try to convince her that she made a mistake. I'm going to trust that she's capable of making her own choices and communicating them directly. Sophie nodded approvingly, then surprised everyone by pulling out her phone and holding it up toward the crowd. Emma, if you're listening to this live stream that I started 5 minutes ago, you just heard something that no one in your life has ever said to you before. You heard someone who loves you refuse to play your games. Now you get to decide what you want to do with that information. The revelation that Sophie had been live streaming our entire conversation sent another ripple of shock through the crowd. Emma wasn't just somewhere in Riverside wondering what was happening at her wedding. She was watching it all unfold in real time. The live stream revelation changed everything. Suddenly, every person in that crowd understood that Emma wasn't just missing from her own wedding. She was actively watching us navigate the aftermath of her disappearance. The weight of performing for an invisible audience added a surreal quality to an already unprecedented situation. Sophie lowered her phone but kept the live stream running. Emma, the ball is in your court now. You can keep hiding and waiting for Jake to chase you, or you can come here and have an actual conversation about what you want. I felt strangely calm as we waited. The hardest part was over. I'd said everything I needed to say. Now Emma had to decide whether she was ready to engage with reality instead of the elaborate fantasy she'd constructed around relationships and love. The guests began to murmur among themselves, some standing to stretch their legs while others remained glued to their seats, unwilling to miss whatever happened next. Grace approached me hesitantly, clearly unsure of her role in this unprecedented situation. Jake, should I dismiss the guests? Cancel the reception? The caterers are asking about dinner service? Before I could answer, a commotion near the parking lot caught everyone's attention. A figure in jeans and an oversized sweater was walking quickly across the grass toward our gathering. Even from a distance, I recognized Emma's determined stride and the way she tucked her hair behind her left ear when she was nervous. The crowd fell silent again as Emma approached. She looked smaller somehow, without her wedding dress and elaborate styling, more like the person I'd fallen in love with during those early coffee shop conversations, and less like the perfect bride she'd spent months preparing to become. She stopped about 20 feet from where Sophie and I stood, her eyes scanning the crowd of wedding guests before settling on my face. For a long moment, we just looked at each other while 300 people held their breath. You live-streamed our private family business to social media, Emma finally said, directing her question to Sophie with a mixture of hurt and incredulity. Sophie held up her phone, showing that the live stream was still active. Nothing about today has been private, Emma. You involved 300 people in your dramatic exit. Just made sure you could hear their reactions. Emma's jaw tightened. Mess. And I could see her struggling to maintain control in a situation that had spiraled far beyond her careful planning. Sophie, you had no right to expose me like that. And you had no right to disappear on your wedding day and expect everyone to spend weeks guessing what you wanted. Sophie replied evenly. You created this situation, Emma. I just refused to enable it. Emma turned her attention to me, her expression a mixture of anger, hurt, and something that might have been relief. Jake, is this really how you want to handle our relationship? By humiliating me in front of everyone we know? The question revealed everything I needed to understand about how Emma viewed what had just happened. She saw my honesty as humiliation rather than an attempt at genuine communication. She saw Sophie's refusal to enable her behavior as betrayal rather than love. Emma, I don't want to humiliate you. I said quietly. I want to have a real conversation with you about what we both actually want from this relationship. But I can't do that if you keep creating tests and challenges, instead of just talking to me. She took a few steps closer, her voice rising with frustration. You think this was a test? Jake, I was terrified. I was standing in that bridal suite looking at myself in that dress, and I realized I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. I didn't know if you were marrying me or marrying the perfect girlfriend I've been pretending to be. The admission hung in the air between us, more honest than anything Emma had shared in months. I could see tears starting to form in her eyes, and my instinct was to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But I also recognized that this was exactly the moment Sophie had been talking about. Emma was finally being vulnerable, and my response would determine whether we moved toward genuine intimacy or fell back into our old patterns. Emma, I've been wondering the same thing, I admitted. I don't know if I was planning to marry you, or marry the idea of the life you designed for us. And I don't think either of us should get married until we figure out who we actually are when we're not performing for each other. Emma looked genuinely shocked by my response. She'd expected me to reassure her, to tell her that, of course, I loved the real her, to minimize her concerns and push for the wedding to continue. So what are you saying? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at Sophie, who gave me an encouraging nod, then looked back at Emma. I'm saying that I love you enough to not marry you today. I love you enough to take the time, to really get to know each other without the pressure of wedding planning and perfect girlfriend performance. I love you enough to find out if we can build something real together. Emma stared at me for a long moment, processing words she clearly hadn't expected to hear. And what if we can't? What if we take time to get to know each other and discover that we're not actually compatible? Then we'll have learned something important, I replied. And we'll both be free to find relationships that don't require us to hide parts of ourselves. David stepped forward, his protective instincts. Still engaged? Jake, you're talking about throwing away 2.5 years together. Emma made a mistake today, but that doesn't mean you can't work through it. Sophie turned to face her father directly.
Dad.
They're not throwing anything away. They're choosing to build something authentic instead of settling for something that looks perfect on the surface. Emma wiped her eyes and looked around at the crowd of wedding guests who were still watching our every move. So what happens now? Do we just send everyone home and pretend this never happened? We thank them for coming, I said. We acknowledge that love is complicated and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is admit when you're not ready for the commitment you thought you wanted. Emma nodded slowly, then surprised everyone by taking my hand. Jake, I'm sorry I put you through this. I'm sorry I put everyone through this. I was scared and I handled it badly. I know, I replied, squeezing her hand gently. And I'm sorry I spent so long going along with plans that didn't feel authentic to either of us. Sophie ended the live stream and slipped her phone into her clutch. So, should we tell people they can head to the reception venue for dinner? It seems like a shame to waste all that food. Emma actually laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from her in months. Leave it to you to turn our relationship crisis into a dinner party. Well, Sophie grinned. At least now, it might actually be fun. As the crowd slowly dispersed, some heading home and others accepting Sophie's impromptu invitation to an unconventional wedding reception, I realized that Emma and I had just done something neither of us had ever done before. We'd chosen honesty over performance, authenticity over perfection. It wasn't the wedding day either of us had planned, but it might have been exactly what we needed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.